Introduce Lars to the floor to give us some insight on the world of Agile development.
Yeah, I'm Lars Bendix. Like I said, I come from Lund University, and down there in Skåne, apart from the university things, I also run a network of people who are interested in or working with primarily software configuration management. And so it's called SNESM, Scandinavian Network of Excellence in Software Configuration Management. It's much more loosely organized and much more informal than apparently this CM forum. But we have a conference once a year in Lund in June. We've been running that for 10 years, and it's about an audience of this size every year. Besides that, I do a course in configuration management for my students. This year we had 55 students, so that's one way of getting to a Nobel Prize in computer science. The course code is EEAN10. So if you want more information about this, then Google should be your friend, and put that into Google. So it's a 7.5 credit course. Which means that the students have to do about 200 hours of work for this. They complain because I take it serious that they should put in 200 hours of work. But even though it's known as one of the courses where you have to work hardest to earn your credits, then I usually don't have any problems in getting students on the course because they think it's very useful and they learn a lot. I thought that this was one out of 3 courses at university in the whole world, but a couple of weeks ago I looked for information about the course that they were running in Amsterdam, Holland, and it seems that that course is not running anymore. So now there is Lund and there is Rio de Janeiro in Brazil that on a regular basis run academic courses on configuration management. Maybe that's why there is a mess about configuration management.
Is this course just software?
Well, it's configuration management, and it is also software configuration management. But a lot of the principles are general. So if you move sufficiently high up, then software configuration management, hardware configuration management is probably the same principles, the same concepts, the same problems that we're dealing with. Yeah, I try to fix the situation also in different ways. So I have a short course, 1 credit, that means about 25 hours of work from a student. I've been teaching that in Spain, in Italy. So it's 2 lectures, 2 exercise sessions and 1 computer lab, 10 hours with the students. In one place in Italy, I threatened to run it in 1 day. Well, 10 hours you can fit into 1 day, but the professor said that that would kill his students. So this is my presentation for today. I don't have slides. I can talk for hours about configuration management. And down at Lund University, I'm also involved in the Agile activities we have there. So I could also talk for hours about Agile, which means that for Agile configuration management, I could talk for hours and hours. And I've been given 15 minutes. That's why I've tried to squeeze it into, I can't even read it, this. And so this gives more flexibility. And actually this little yellow sticker also means that last-minute additions can be accommodated.
Change control.
Yeah, it's related to change control. It's related to these layered CCBs and the escalating. So that's nothing new.
Good.
Daniels wrote a book about configuration management in 1985, and these layered CCBs and escalating the change requests to higher CCBs are described in there.
I need that reference.
It's part of the syllabus for my course in Lund.
Good.
Apparently, it's more visible in his book than I had thought, because many times at the exam, the students, they get into these details of escalating, and I say, well, unless you get out and work in a big company, then don't bother about escalating, because you'll have only one CCB. But if you get out in a big company, and Daniel's book is written for military projects in the US, which means that, as I tell my students, it don't get worse than that. If you can handle that, then you can handle anything. Now, many people think that discussing what configuration management is an interesting question. I don't. If you want to get into a flame war, then go to a LinkedIn group and then say, this is my definition of configuration management, and what is the core of configuration management, and you'll get that long a discussion. I don't think that is, well, it might be interesting from some viewpoints, but I would rather play Jeopardy with you. So instead of what is configuration management, instead of saying, well, it's traceability, it's baselines, it's CCBs, then given that CCBs and traceability and configuration status accounting is the answer, what is the question? Why are we doing configuration management? What is the purpose?
Quality.
Quality? Yeah.
Be sure that all people working with the same product definition and be aware of changes of the product definition.
Same thing. We're working with the same thing. Sorry? Control. Nice to get something short that I can write.
Product integrity.
Integrity. Yeah.
Cost control?
Sorry?
Cost control?
Cost control.
Flexibility,
Flexibility.
because if you can control your change, you can be flexible.
Yeah.
Flexible without it.
Well, traceability could also be the answer. So why are we doing traceability?
Otherwise we get hit by the US
The Food and Drug Administration,
administration
Or-
or the what's the other one?
the NSA, the NSA.
NSA possibly?
You can't avoid that.
Effectivity. Yeah.
Be aware of consequences when you change something.
So could that be impact analysis?
Oh yeah.
That's what I teach my students.
Okay.
Now we learn a new word.
Peace and fun.
Sorry?
Peace and fun.
Peace and
Yeah.
peace and fun.
Ha koll, ha kul. Because if you have control, then you can allow yourself to have fun.
So that's the opposite of chaos and anarchy.
Well, you like that, but
You heard about the smiling product manager?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fun.
ha koll.
Well, sometimes my students, they say, well, we have fun when there is chaos and anarchy. Fortunately, my students, before coming to the configuration management course, do these agile projects. And I say, was that fun on the first iteration? And they said, no. I say, because it was chaotic. Nobody knew what was going on, and there was no coordination, and it was not a pleasant situation. Now, sometimes when I have, well, I try to prepare also my students for the real world out there. And I say, well, now we've been through this course, and you have learned a lot of techniques, and you have learned a lot of methods and concepts and principles and stuff like that. But one thing that you have to remember is that everything in the world is not configuration management. We are doing this for a purpose. It's not an end in itself to do configuration management. And what we have to do is to go out there and service and support a development organization. So if I had to say, what is it that we do with configuration management? Why are we doing this? What is the purpose of configuration management? That is to service and support a development organization. And of course we have all of these goals that we want to obtain. And then my students hopefully have a toolbox with concepts and principles and techniques and stuff like that. And when they get into problems, or the organization has a problem, this thing doesn't run smoothly, then you dig down into your toolbox and you find a suitable tool to fix your problem. Instead of standing there and saying, well, we should do it like this. I mean, I've tried doing that. I tried doing that with the students on these Agiles, and they do like children do with their parents. They don't listen. And I say, okay, be my guest. And that's the beauty of these Agile projects. That is, we can allow them to fail, and fail miserably. And usually some of these students, around the second or third iteration, when I go down in the computer labs, and I see that they have huge merge conflicts because they don't update and integrate frequently, I look at them and said, the feared word from the parent, I told you so. And they look at me and say, yeah. What else did you tell us that could be helpful? And then they start listening. And then we can service and support this organization. So what is Agile? What is Agile configuration management? And how should we do configuration management on Agile projects? Well, I could talk for hours and hours. And the short way of doing that would probably be to contrast it to the waterfall. So waterfall, you're the guy who is supposed to stop me
Yeah,
when I run out of time.
yeah, you have 5 more minutes.
5. Ooh, I have to speed up then. So what is waterfall? What is that characterizes the waterfall?
One thing at a time.
Yeah? But don't look in the notes because it's actually said there. So it's one thing at a time, and actually that also true for Agile, and we'll come back to that. But the waterfall is like we have the requirements phase, then we have architecture and design, then they throw it over the fence to code, which throw it over the fence to test, and then they sort of go into a circle, infinite loop or whatever. Then it probably gets to QA because they don't trust test, and then they deliver or put into operations. So we have these phases, and we have things that get thrown over the fence. We have interfaces between these. They have things that they share, and work on, and use, and we should not change these things unless everything is under control.
Lars, then you misspelled an O at the end. Oops.
Well, probably you could put that on everything. Now, Agile, how does that work?
Same way, but faster.
Well, if you really want to know something about Agile, get into the Agile philosophy, then buy Ken Beck's book about extreme programming, but buy the second edition. The first edition is very practical and shows the practices, whereas the second edition is a complete rewrite and he gets into the background, and he shows the 5 fundamental values of Agile thinking. And I don't have time to brainstorm that with you, so I'll get into the answer. So the first value is feedback. Then we have communication. Like they discovered at Volvo, communication is very important. Simplicity, courage, and respect. Once you have deeply understood these 5 fundamental values, you know about Agile. Then you know why we do pair programming, then you know why we do frequent releases, you know why we do test-driven development, and so on. Now, feedback and communication. What is the purpose of configuration management? Why is it that we do configuration management?
Service and support.
Service and support, great. You're a good student. You listen and you understand. Service and support. Now, we should service and support that people can get feedback and that they can communicate and coordinate. The way that we do Agile is in a different way than the way we do waterfall. So we have stories. So we don't have requirements and stuff like that. We have stories. We have tasks. So stories can be broken down into tasks. We can have more stories and more stories. And it goes like this. So Ken Beck is a great guy, but he's also a dreamer. Because in the Agile thinking, in Ken Beck's thinking, then we pick a story, we pick a task, and then we do the requirements analysis for that task. We do the architecture and design for that task, you and I together. Then you and I together, we write the code, specifying the tests first. Then we do quality assurance, and then we deliver and put it into operations. And then we're done. Done, really done. And we go back and we pick another one. So instead of these fences between the silos that we have in the waterfall model, where we throw it over the fence, and one of the ways that we can service and support a waterfall organization is to take control over and facilitate these handovers that we have between the different phases. Now we have stories and tasks. And now when we have to service and support an Agile organization, then we have to service and support that you and I can hand over the result of our story, our task, to the rest of the team. Or to the customer if we go all the way into operations. That is exactly the same thing. We are servicing and supporting, we are taking care of handovers. This concept of handovers being the very core of configuration management was given to me by Kristen Pendleton from Soft House when I was discussing configuration management with him. And I think it's a very good way of demonstrating this. Then we get into organizations like Amazon, who does Agile and who does a new release about every second. So they release onto the market with this frequency new versions of their software ecosystem. They must be sure that we can integrate this way. This is the way that we have to think when we do Agile configuration management. This is how. Yeah.
If we have a quite big software project where you need to know quite different parts that, and you have a lot of different software development teams distributed in the world working with different parts. And then that means that you need a lot of communication and feedback capability between all these different teams. Then you can work agile even in big projects, I think.
Yeah.
But it put a lot of big requirements on the speed of communication.
Why?
Because if you, I think when you work agile, the teams are not too big.
Mm.
And if you're developing a very huge software, you maybe need to be a lot of different teams. And they to deliver a result at the end that is conform to what you are intended that the software should do, they need to communicate with each other.
And there's a lot of
But
dependencies. That's the problem with software. There's a lot of
Yeah,
dependencies.
that's why
You cannot deliver until the other
and they
story is the delivery.
But why do we need to communicate?
because we need to work with the same product.
Yeah.
So we not end up with a lot of different products.
So why do we need to work with the same product?
Because as I said, 1 year in the time, you need to deliver a product that is specified to have some functionality.
Yeah, but
So
that
if you have different functionality after this year, you have not succeeded with delivering the software.
I've got 3 or 4 more whys, so to dig deeper into that. But one of the things, turning back to the Agile thing, where communication is very important, and one of the practices is that the team should be in the same room at the same time. Another practice is that the customer should be on site. We need to communicate with the customer. Why does he have to be on site? Because we have a desperate need to communicate with him, and communication on site, face to face, is much easier. Now, why do we have to communicate with the customer? Well, in Agile, one of the reasons why we have to communicate so much with the customer is that he specifies what he wants to have on a piece of paper like that. That is a story. That is a lot of requirements. That is very fussy. It's not very clear, which means that since this is not very clear, we desperately need to talk to the customer, which means that we need to facilitate communication. Another way of solving that problem could be to make this very clear. Then we would eliminate some of the motive for communicating. When we talk about programming, why does the team need to be in the same room at the same time? Because we want to behave like a bunch of kindergarten kids or cowboys or whatever. One of the practices in extreme programming is collective code ownership. Everyone can change everything, which means that if I need to change some of the things that you're doing, we need to communicate because we are working on the same thing. So Ken Beck is trying to solve that problem by making it very, very easy to communicate. If you are in a distributed setup, I wouldn't recommend that because communication in a distributed setup is very difficult. Then there is another way of solving the problem, and that is to make sure that if you and we are in 2 different places, like Stockholm and Lund, then we work on 2 different things. And the interface between us is very simple, it's very clear, and it's very fixed. Then we don't need to communicate very much. Again,
Did you have, last question or?
That means that you really need to have a very modular software with very clear interfaces between each module.
Yeah.
So that means that you need to have some software architecture defining the complete software with its end functionality, and then you have to deliver your smaller software modules for the interface specification. application.
A little bit like you were talking about these layered CCB. So if you have a layered project, then at the top layer you sort of have the general architecture. If you're working like that, and if you're working in a distributed setup, I would recommend that you take a look at the open source world and the way that they are organizing projects. They are really distributed, and they don't have a lot of service and support, but they survive
Okay.
somehow.
Thank you so much, Lars. Okay.